Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of everything you need for mountain climbing. Again, the most basic setup you need for pretty much everything in the lower 48. Part 1 is where I talked about what you need for non-technical mountaineering, and I have all that stuff sort of back there. And then now I'm going to talk about the gear for technical mountaineering. So if you haven't seen part 1, then go back and check it out. That's where I talk about clothing, your basic camping gear, starting to talk about crampons, and then a basic crevasse rescue kit. And now I'm going to talk to you about the more technical type stuff, as well as a few changes in, say, certain gear like footwear and ice axes and whatnot. Alright, so first thing I want to talk about is footwear. I cleared out all the extra stuff that I talked about in the last video to make things less complicated. So in part 1 I mentioned using these boots for most non-technical mountaineering, and that's really all you need. But if you're getting into more technical stuff, we got to think about more technical alpine climbing in general. And so alpine climbing is a catch-all term that includes everything in mountaineering, as well as anything else above tree line. So mountaineering, we think about like Mount Rainier, climbing Mount Rainier. That's where it's like if you're climbing the DC route, you just use those boots and you're walking to the top. Whereas if we go to the catch-all alpine climbing term, we can use another great example is West Ridge or Forbidden, where these boots are not that great at rock climbing, and so we switch to boots that are slightly better. And so that's when you want to expand your quiver to at least 2 pairs of boots. These are fundamentally different. Those are full shank, or sometimes called 4-season boots. These are 3/4 shank or 3-season boots. Now I actually have a video that goes in depth into boots and why they're different, and different crampons with them as well, so you can watch that. But it's just, now that we're moving into the technical stuff, that's where the 3/4 shanks really come in handy. As well as for crampons for those 3/4, since they don't have a toe bail in front, you're going to have to go crampon more like this from the last video, the contact, which is actually pretty good in a variety of situations. Or you get a pneumatic style crampon with a heel clip in the back and then a strap for the front. And again, I have a video on crampons that goes in depth into crampons, and I use these exact boots and then this type of crampon, or this same exact crampon, only with a different binding on it for my example, so you can watch that. Moving on to the technical gear, this is where you can see the differences. I laid out some stuff. The harness, so I switched out that really light climbing thong, the mountaineering harness, with a more technical harness. This is a new thing that BD came out with, the Vision harness. Has 4 gear loops, has 2 spots for ice clippers, and it's just really thin and small. Also has a belay loop. And so this is becoming my new harness. That's kind of like my go-to for these lightweight alpine climbs with, you're not really carrying that much gear, it's a small rack, and so you can just focus on going. Another harness I really like if I want the padding or the extra sort of, well, mainly just the padding, is the Technician harness, also BD, and that's just a bit thicker. I'll use that more for a lot of ice climbing in general. Another harness that's good for this is the Sita harness by Petzl. I really want one of those. They're super nice. But that's a good all-around harness. You just need to make sure it's compatible with ice screw clippers, and has an array of gear loops to help keep your stuff organized. Moving down to the actual swag. I got a few extra things. 5 locking carabiners. That's just kind of a given, especially for technical routes. You want to be able to, they just come in handy so much, and if any rescue situations happen, you got to be prepared for that. I have this one laid out because a lot of times on technical climbs, especially more rock related, I will leave this behind. It's a little too specialized for me. I mean, it gets all the same stuff as that, but then I have to deal with the extra clipping. So a lot of times I will leave this behind, especially if I'm just on a quick glacier before the actual climb, like North Ridge of Forbidden, or if a lot of time will be spent on rock. Something like North Ridge of Baker, I may break this out again because there's a lot more glacier travel on that technical route. Then I have the technical gear right here, the cams in front of me. 0.4 to 2. This is about as minimal of a rack as I go with. I'll use this guiding Shuxin, and like any route on Shuxin, I mean, as well as nearly or just about any route in like Boston Basin, El Dorado. I haven't climbed the Dorado Needle yet. That is a plan of mine for next season, just on my own, when like not guiding. I'm also planning on the West Ridge of El Dorado, and I'll probably bring the same rack for it, depending on, I haven't done a huge amount of research, but just from that area with what I've climbed in that area so far, this is pretty much all the cams you need. This is just the 5. And you know, a lot of that depends on your comfort level, traveling over that rock terrain. I'm very comfortable on rock, especially easy alpine rock, so I've found that this amount works well for me. If I'm doing something like the North Ridge of Stort, then I'm obviously going to bring more than this. Definitely add in the 0.3 and the number 3. And then moving up, yeah, just like my example, North Ridge of Mount Stort, I will bring double rack because that is a huge amount of rock, and over huge amount of 5th class sort of rock. Ice screws. So I have 6 laid out here. That's probably about the right amount to have. Again, these are not the lightweight, the ultralight version. I am planning on getting basically this set of ultralight screws eventually. Right now I have the heavy steel screws. 119, 116, 213, 210. And then those will just about get you up any alpine ice route, especially in Washington, because you never really climb too much ice. Actually, this may be, some people may call that overkill, but 6 screws are pretty good. And then also the variety of length, too, is really nice. So it's just adding on 4 more screws. I also have, again, the same as before, 2 ice clippers for my harness. Again, oftentimes I'll only have 1, but I find myself on any ice or any alpine route, technical, I usually have, you know, maybe that same amount of cams, but I'll bring 1 or 2 screws with me. They come in handy. Over here, I have 2 alpine draws. Definitely, if I'm rolling with like this amount of cams, 2 alpine draws is usually good enough. The most I usually extend up to is 4. So here I got 2 more. So 4 alpine draws is about as many as I go. Again, if I'm doing something like the North Ridge of Stort, I may bring more like 6 or 8, but this is generally all I need. And if I'm doing something like North Ridge of Baker, where I have a bit more ice screws with me, I may bring a bit more then as well. But a lot of times on alpine rock terrain, especially stuff that we're guiding, we're just using these as quick anchors for short roping or short pitching. Here I have the start of my crevasse rescue stuff. So because I have all these non-lockers on my quick draws and 1 on my cam, I carry a slightly different setup than in the non-technical mountaineering setup. But usually I carry 1 bundle of cord and 1 quad sling. And then again, this depends on the route and depends on who I'm climbing with. But a lot of times with more technical routes with barely any glaciers, this is kind of all I need, because I can use this with all my other stuff to pull someone out of a crevasse, as well as they don't take up much space on my harness, because generally I don't use them at all during the climb. And that does vary on climb to climb. Sometimes I'll bring an extra cord, but generally I leave 1 of those cords behind. And then here's my crevasse rescue setup. It's quite a bit more condensed on 1 big wire oval gate beaner. And then that's because I'm really not using this stuff too often on the climb. I got my TID block, my micro traction lead here, as well as a double link sling. Usually this is a Dyneema sling. I just have this for example. And then a hollow block. And so I'll use these for rappelling off if the route requires rappelling off and it's not a walk-off. But this is really not stuff I really tend to use in my climb. It's just my crevasse rescue kit. I clip it on the back right of my harness and then it stays there, and yeah, I don't really have any issues with that. And then with all the other gear I have, you know, obviously some cams and some alpine draws, that's plenty enough to pull someone out of a crevasse. Belay plate, like this Reverso or an ATC, depending on the thickness of rope I'm using. Sometimes when I'm climbing with my friends, I'll just use a half rope, and so I'll bring like the Black Diamond ATC guide to accommodate the thinner rope size. You'll also want some gloves, like actually a lot of my technical alpine routes that are smaller, like under 9,000 or so, excluding Mount Shuxon, which is like 9.1, but I'll bring these for Shuxon too. And this is kind of like my lightweight pair of gloves I'll use, and I'll keep them on a carabiner to keep them on my harness, but belay gloves do come in handy for just keeping your hands warm in general, especially these OR ones. They keep your hands a bit warmer, or at least I feel like they do. Another thing I may choose to add in, depending on the route, is this V-threader. This is made by J-Snare, and I'll just attach that to my crevasse rescue kit as one other thing. It's kind of like my climbing toolbox right here. Alright, let's talk ice axes. And so in the first video, I talked about using this thing, and then I also talked about using this ice axe. And this was my go-to ice axe for non-technical mountaineering. But now, I'm going to throw it to the side and then talk about these ones. So the ice axe of choice for technical mountaineering that's more rock climbing rather than ice or snow climbing has been this Petzl Sumtech, and this is the hammer version too. It's quickly becoming my favorite ice axe, and I do plan on getting one with an adze, so that way I can use these on like North Ridge of Mount Baker, because they work really well. They have this great sort of bent shaft right here and a nice pinky rest, and it works really well. I've done some technical climbing in this. It's funny that I talked about how I wouldn't use this ice axe for non-technical mountaineering, but this is kind of where it comes into play, is using it for technical mountaineering. When I just want a quick ice axe to get over something, it's very unlikely to use it walking with it just to get past the approach, and then I'm spending a lot of my time on vertical rock. It's just going to spend most of its time on the pack. It's actually a really nice axe to use for that application. Like if I'm planning on going to the Bugaboos at some point in the future, and this is probably the axe I'm going to use for it, because it's quick glacier travel on really well marked glacier too, to vertical rock objectives. And then here are the heavy hitters. These are technical ice axe or technical ice tools. They have the large pinky rest here. They have a upper pommel to go up. The actual top of the axe is very ergonomic to choke up on it. You also see how this set has an adze and a hammer. It's very common for alpine climbing. And then the bottom spike, as opposed to other ice axes, isn't as pronounced. So this would be like North Ridge of Baker, common alpine ice routes that are, somewhat demanding. You would use these in Alaska, and I use them for vertical ice climbing too, because that's exactly what they're built for, and they climb vertical ice amazingly well. And so the North Ridge of Baker is a good example. Liberty Ridge on Rainier, not that I'm ever going to climb that route because it's just way too sketchy for me. And then other objectives like that. And then we can always say Cassine Ridge on Denali, and technical routes on Mini Moonflower on Mount Hunter, for examples that people use these in Alaska. For the technical alpine climber, maybe a selection like these 4 axes wouldn't be bad. I only own 5 axes right there, and then these 5 get me up everything I need. So a few more ice axes are nice, depending on what you want to climb. If you just want to be climbing technical rock terrain, then there's no need for these heavy-duty technical axes. Just these more advanced beginner axes will do the trick. And again, if you want more stats on what makes these axes what, then you can refer to my ice axe video, which I will be producing soon, sometime in the future. So as far as ropes go on technical alpine climbs, that's really going to depend on the route. Basically, you want to go with the thinnest and shortest rope you can get away with. A lot of people will bring half ropes up on climbs when they're just with their friends, and it's just a safeguard against a fall, which is really unlikely, and plenty of people do that. This is a triple rated Sterling Nano 9, and it's a great alpine rope, very durable. I've had this one for a while and it's still looking great. Generally 50 or 60 meter is good. Most alpine routes where you have to rappel, you're going to need a 60 meter, but on other alpine routes where it's more of a walk-off, you can get away with a 40 or 50 meter. So having a couple different lengths of rope in your quiver is good to have, but if you want one rope, then go for a 60 meter thin, dry treated, double or triple rated rope. Alright guys, so that's my technical mountaineering gear. It's really not that much extra when you put it on top of the non-technical gear. You can see how it all sort of piles up together. Definitely a little bit more of an investment, but this will get you up just about at least 92% of the mountains out there. And if you guys like to bring certain gear with you, like some people like to bring tri-cams and other stuff, then please comment on that. If you have any requests for videos, then please send me a request. Like, share, subscribe if you want to support me in what I do to make more videos, especially videos like gear review and other stuff like that cost money. Then you can sign up on my Patreon. The link's in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video.